Welcome to OncoLife interview session. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Dr. Sara Naseri, CEO and co-founder of the Qvin. Dr. Naseri, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for our conversation.
In this session, we will explore an incredibly innovative technology in women's health, the first FDA-approved menstrual blood testing solution, QPAT. It has potential to transform healthcare by enabling to early diagnosis of the numerous women health conditions, includes some cancers. Could we start with some information about your professional journey and what inspired you to co-found Qvin and develop this innovative technology?
Absolutely. So actually the company name Qvin is the word actually means a woman in Danish. And the reason I bring it up is because I was born and raised in Denmark, and so was my co-founder. So that's sort of where the company name comes from. I did 7 years of medical school, came here. It's about 10 years ago. So I've lived in the US for 10 years, it's kind of crazy to think about how time flies. But really, the journey with Qvin started while I was still in medical school, and I had sort of seen in practice, and also, of course, knew from theory how important early diagnostics is, and how time really is the most important prognostic factor for any condition. And yet often, patients really rarely came to the clinic, at the earliest stages, right? They came typically when they had a symptom, which is already, kind of later stage. It's already hard at that point to be preventative, at least. And so that was something that always sort of was on my mind. Why is it so hard to be preventative about our health? And I think one of the challenges really is that it's actually really hard to know what's going on in our bodies outside the doctor's office. And so, I'd say in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen this explosion in medical devices coming out, trying to do exactly that, give us information about what is going on in our bodies. We can track our pulse and our steps and our sweat and all kinds of, devices that are trying to do that, but not always is the data very clinically relevant. So when starting Qvin, really wanted to find a way that we could get access to information about our bodies conveniently, regularly, but also have it be clinically relevant. And so because blood is the most commonly used bodily fluid for any condition or any diagnostic, really, blood became top of mind. And then the question became, well, how do we get access to blood non-invasively, regularly, conveniently? And that's sort of when it hit me that, hold on a minute, half of the world bleeds every single month. Why has nobody looked at that? And that sort of question was sort of the beginning of what became a very long journey. And surprisingly enough, there really wasn't very much data. There was frankly one paper published on the proteomics of menstrual blood at the time. So very little research had been done on the clinical utility of menstrual blood. And that led me to Stanford University Hospital, where I worked for a couple of years with an incredible team in really understanding the utility and where this could be helpful in the clinic. So that's kind of the short version of kind of how we all got started here and why Qvin came about in the early days.
Could you explain how the QPAT works, its core functionality, and what makes it so transformative tool in menstrual health monitoring?
Absolutely. So I think, once we understood what menstrual blood was, and, we've published on this and have a good understanding of the composition and where the clinical utility is, the next thing was really, well, how do we build a collection device that captures this in a way that is consistent and keeps it stable and is easy for the user? And so that's, when we started working on the QPAD, which is the device, we call it the QPAD. And essentially, it's a modified menstrual pad that is built on organic cotton. It looks and feels like any other menstrual pad, but it has a modified little collection strip that is embedded in the pad. And so, when a woman uses the QPAD, she really uses it like any other pad, but the difference is that there's a little tab that you pull once you've saturated the pad, and that little strip removes the collection device. And that little strip is then what is shipped, put in a little container that is pre-stamped, shipped to the laboratory, the clinical laboratory, where the analysis happens, and then you receive your results on a mobile phone.
Qvin has demonstrated the menstrual blood can be valuable diagnostic tool. What biomarker can QPAT currently detect, and what the potential condition could it help diagnose in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you just pulled up some slides that were on what menstrual blood is. If we could go back to the menstrual blood slide real quick, maybe I can just take a step back and talk a little bit about what we know about menstrual blood, because it is quite fascinating that menstrual blood is, of course, it's blood, right? So in the same way you go in to the clinic and you do a venous blood draw and you draw blood from your arm, that blood is also present in menstrual blood. But interestingly enough, menstrual blood also contains two other bodily fluids, endometrial tissue and vaginal fluid. And so it's a very unique bodily fluid, in fact, and we know that there's a little bit less than 400 unique proteins in menstrual blood that tells us information about the reproductive organs. And, I think we're still in the early days of figuring out exactly how those unique biomarkers, at least, can be helpful and useful in diagnosis of various women's health conditions. But this unique composition, and that's the slide you just had up, really positions menstrual blood very uniquely to solve for some of these big women's health issues, where we really, big women's health issues affect a lot of women, but we don't have very good solutions, or if there is a solutions to detect and monitor, they're very invasive. And so we believe, because of this composition that is unique to menstrual blood, that there's a very interesting opportunity here to solve for some of these very big women's health issues.
Receiving the FDA clearance is a major milestone. How significant is the Qvin and the future of the menstrual blood testing? What doors does it open for the broader application of your technology?
I think that in many ways, sort of clinically speaking, from my own perspective, I think menstrual blood is the most overlooked opportunity in women's health. Here we have, a bodily fluid that comes naturally, regularly, conveniently, and it's not being used to make lives of patients easier and make healthcare more accessible, frankly. So in terms of, obtaining FDA clearance, massive, massive moment for, I would say, women's health. And of course, for our team that has worked very hard on this every day. I mean, this is not something that happened overnight. It's been years and years of, obtaining the data, running the clinical trials, and really making sure that we've answered every possible question on how the QPAT functions, the accuracy, the consistency. And I think for that reason, it was a big moment for women's health. It was a big moment for our team. And then I think, broadly speaking, when you think about menstrual blood and the stigmas that unfortunately still are present when we talk about menstrual blood, I think it's a big moment for that conversation, right? That menstrual blood is not a waste product. It's not something dirty or gross. It is, in fact, an incredible opportunity, a window into our health, and an opportunity for women to know what's going on in this very, very convenient way. I think this FDA clearance marks the value of menstrual blood, clinically speaking, and also, the fact that it is not that common that we have FDA approved at-home collection devices. And so what you're showing here is a picture of the QPAD, which was FDA cleared and is an at-home collection device, right? And I think it really speaks to, when we do ask a patient or a woman or, a patient in general to collect at home, it has to be very, very simple. It has to be very bulletproof. And I think the QPAD is built in a way that it is just incredibly simple. Most women are very familiar with how to collect. And I think that is part of the reason why we were able to obtain the FDA clearance for specifically at-home use, which is very exciting. I think in many ways just the beginning of what will become a very exciting journey for the opportunity of this part of female biology.
With non-invasive and self-administrated nature, do you see the QPAT setting a new standard for the diagnosis? How might this shape the future of the healthcare accessibility?
Accessibility is actually one of the things that we talk a lot about at Qvin. It's something that we care a lot about. I think it's important as innovators in healthcare that making solutions that are inaccessible, expensive, really doesn't really solve healthcare issues, right? We really have to think through when we innovate in healthcare that it has to solve for some of the issues like being non-invasive, convenient, but also accessible and affordable. And so, I think the opportunity with the menstrual, with the QPAD in particular, is that it is a very accessible medical device. It's built on organic cotton, right? So it's very available materials that we are using here, and that was very intentional because at the end of the day, accessibility in healthcare is really critical for us to be able to provide care. And I think not just in the US, there are many, I would say even within the US, there are many areas where, women, it's hard for women to get access to care. They live very far, 2 hours drive from an OBGYN, and it's not, there are barriers to getting that care. And let alone when you look globally speaking, where there are really a much higher demand, or maybe even a lack of medical doctors and medical professionals to test patients, really how this could change that aspect of accessibility. Because here is a solution where women can actually do it themselves. They can take control of their own health. They can collect on their own terms. They don't have to go in and, have a medical professional, collect cells from the cervix to run a cervical cancer screening, or, poke a needle in the arm, or whatever it may be that we are testing for. But this is, the patient can do it themselves at home. And it really makes that accessibility component much, much more, much easier, right? And I think we as a company do have a global perspective and a vision that menstrual blood is a global phenomenon. Women all over the world experience this, and so in many ways the QPAD is a global solution. We have to build it in a way that it makes it possible for women really all over the world to be able to get access to this opportunity and get access to care.
Research indicate the potential of the menstrual blood testing for HPV and the cervical cancer screening. Could you elaborate on how QPAD might contribute a global cervical cancer prevention efforts?
Absolutely. We actually, our very first study on cervical cancer screening was funded by the Cancer Institute at Stanford, and really what allowed us to do this first controlled study looking at the concordance between clinician collected cervical specimens, which most women will know it as the pap smear, and have experienced that on their own bodies for the majority of women, at least in our part of the world. Comparing that to using the QPAD at home, and we found that there is very high concordance, and that the QPAD is able to detect cervical cancer very accurately, and in fact actually picks up a few more cases even. So that's very exciting. We've since then done a number of studies to follow up that particular finding. We published that, and we've seen that the results are reproducible. So we really do believe that there is an incredible opportunity here to hopefully finally eradicate cervical cancer, which is a cancer that is entirely preventable, right? Women really should not be dying of cervical cancer today, because if we screen for it, we can entirely prevent cervical cancer's effects there. And so this is something we're very excited about internally, and working really hard to find the path forward to bring that to patients in the US and abroad.
Beyond the cervical cancer, do you see the QPAD being used for early detection of the other cancers? Are there specific oncology application you are currently exploring or envision for the future?
We do. We have a lot of, I think the very location of and where menstrual blood comes from makes it near to think that the cancers that are located in that area, that we would be able to detect those. There has been early data to suggest that some of these cancers that are close to the reproductive organs, like ovarian cancer, endometrial cancer, and of course cervical cancer that we just talked about, that menstrual blood and the QPAD is able to detect those very accurately and early. However, I would say in terms of the research we've done and where we are today, we are the furthest along with cervical cancer. We're very excited about that indication. Some of the other ones are indications that we hope to be able to explore in much more detail, and always looking for institutional partners and academic partners to kind of help conduct some of this research. It's something we care a lot about, and I would say for some of these other cancer, it's still early days and definitely not as far along as the cervical cancer indication.
Mm-hmm. How does QPAT address long-standing barrier to healthcare, particularly for underrepresented and underserved communities?
It's interesting when we ask women, and there was a nationwide study done where women were asked why they were not getting screened for cervical cancer, to take that as an example. And, some of the things that came up was it's embarrassing. You have to go in, get undressed, lay on the table and get a speculum inserted. It's not necessarily a comfortable experience. And frankly, for a lot of women, not a desirable experience. There's also cultural and religious barriers to some of these particular screening modalities that makes it hard. And then, of course, I think for women, we also hear that, especially you mentioned sort of underserved women and minorities, that there is an experience sometimes of being a little bit overlooked and a feeling of, perhaps not being listened to. And I think what we hear why women are so excited about the QPAT is because this really gives women the opportunity to take control in some ways, and without having to necessarily ask for permission or to convince a medical doctor that I would like to know what my average blood sugar is, just to take another example here, or my fertility hormones or my iron levels. But this is a way for them to do it really on their own terms. And it seems to be something that resonates with a lot of women that potentially have felt a little bit overlooked by the medical community. And then I think, that's sort of perhaps on the emotional side of things, but then there's also practical barriers, right? That you have to take time off from work, or, take time away from family life to go in, schedule time, park your car, all of that. It takes time. And, women today are busy. They are a big part of our workforce. They're a big part of our family lives. And I think perhaps not always, despite wanting to know what's going on in their bodies and wanting to stay on top of their health, not always having the time. And so it's always really the question of how do we lower the different barriers that exist for them to get access to care, including the practical ones, so that they can get access in a convenient way and get that information about what's going on in their bodies regularly, so that we hopefully can start to be much more preventative about our healthcare.
In the last question, looking ahead, what's your vision for the role of the menstrual blood testing in the healthcare? Are there specific innovation or advancements that Qvin is currently working on?
We sort of have three goals or hopes for the future of menstrual blood as an opportunity in women's health. And, for us, one thing is, we're excited that the QPAT can provide value to women and give them information about what's going on in their bodies regularly. And that's sort of, on a personal level, something that is, we want to bring that value to people. And I think that's one side of what we hope to see here. The other side is that we really hope that, we collectively can start to enhance women's health. And there's no doubt that women's health has been overlooked, and there is a gender data gap in terms of our knowledge of female biology and how it impacts various conditions and also diagnosis and, frankly, treatments. And so the idea that, with a very convenient, accessible methodology here in the QPAT, that we can start to collect data and collect samples and really start to sort of over time understand how different biomarkers are progressing and how they relate to specific conditions. So that's sort of like collectively use the QPAT, not just to get the information yourself, but also to collectively contribute to us finally enhancing women's health and answering some of these big women's health questions that we don't really have good data on today. And then the last thing that we hope with QPAT and with Qvin is really a little bit what we talked about, is to change the conversation around the stigma that surrounds menstrual blood. Still today, this event that happens every month for women still seems to be causing a lot of shame for some women, and be at least a part of our biology that we don't certainly don't look forward to, but that's a separate thing, but really still have some negative connotations too. And if we can change the conversation and the perception of menstrual blood, perhaps the next generation won't feel that kind of stigma and taboo around what is really a part of their biology, and really something that should be viewed as an incredible opportunity. And so those are sort of some of the things that we are hoping and we're working towards with Qvin and the QPAD, and which is also why we're so appreciative to be here today and to be able to hopefully share that this is an opportunity. It has been FDA cleared, and you can go in and test your hemoglobin A1C, which is the first one that we are offering right now on Amazon and on Qvin.com, because it starts with awareness, right? A lot of women are not even aware that they have this opportunity. So it starts with the conversation, and we can't, we really appreciate the openness to talk about menstrual blood. That's actually not, obvious necessarily, that this is even something, we're finding that, people want to talk about it. So really appreciate that you invited us to come here today and talk about that.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Well, I finished all my questions, and I don't know, do you want to add something more or underline any point in this interview?
I think we covered most of kind of the journey and the opportunity. We could perhaps, if you want, we could pull up the slide that talks a little bit about which biomarkers that have been validated to show kind of what can you test today. This is really this shows some of the biomarkers that have been validated in a clinical laboratory. And really, it's these particular assays came because, of course, they are clinically relevant. They're biomarkers we monitor and measure in clinic very often. But also when we ask women, and we've tested more than 1,000 women with the QPAD now, we've interviewed a lot of women on, what is it that they want to monitor? What is it that, what part of their health is it that is top of mind that they want to know about? And these are some of the examples of, what women are interested in. And so, hemoglobin A1C is your average blood sugar, something that is relevant for all women. And of course, specifically relevant if you are pre-diabetic or have a diabetes, you have to monitor this particular assay, but really it is an important assay in general. Then a lot of women, of course, ask about fertility hormones, and that's not just for fertility, but also women who are approaching perimenopause, to be able to understand what's going on in their bodies when they are in that phase of life. And so those have been validated in a clinical laboratory. Thyroid hormone as well. In general, thyroid conditions are more prevalent among women. But also, thyroid is a measure for your metabolism. And I think a lot of women, it's sort of top of mind. And so that's an example of an assay that we're excited that the QPAD can monitor inflammation. And then, of course, we've already talked a little bit about the cervical cancer application. But that was just, some of the examples of assays that we have fully validated and that we are excited that the QPAD can monitor.
Thank you very much for joining us today, to sharing this insight and your expertise with us. It was a pleasure for us to have you today.
Of course. And as I said, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.